Welcome back, guys. Today I'm going to show you how to lower this 98 Honda Prelude. I'm going to be installing some new shocks and also a set of lowering springs for the car. Now, lowering these kind of Preludes, if you've ever worked on any sort of Civic from 1988 to 2000, the front is the exact same process. First, go ahead and remove the 14mm bolt at the top of the fork. Next, go ahead and remove the 17mm bolt on the bottom of the fork. The bolt head's on the reverse side. The nut is on the front. Now, to get the fork to remove, I always use a hammer. Just hit it off of the shock. It should now be free of the shock. Now, Prelude top hats differ from all the Civics because these have 3 bolts. They're still 14mm. Go ahead and get all of those removed. And then it should have already dropped a little bit. You can slide it out. Okay, if you're dealing with an OEM setup which has the original springs, you're going to need to rent or purchase. I would prefer rent, you don't need to keep them. Get a set of spring compressors. That way you can compress the spring while you remove the top hat. You don't want all of that pressure from the compressed spring shooting the top hat off and maybe potentially hurting yourself or damaging something. So you're going to need spring compressors. We don't have to use them because we're working on a set of old lowering springs that were on this car. These are a set of the TNs, and it has some aftermarket shops made by OE Spectrum, it looks like. And we're replacing them with a different set. I believe these are by DNA Motoring. These are Advanced Shock Technology, AST shock absorbers. The owner was saying that the car feels really soft now. I don't know if maybe these might be a really old spring. He's unsure of how old they are. He never put them on. They were on the car when he bought it. But we're going with something that has a 280 spring rate in the front and 250 in the rear, which should be relatively sporty, but still a comfortable ride. Now we need the old hardware off of the shock assembly. We need the top hat. We need the shock cover. This is the dust cover. Keep any of the dust out of the piston. And any of the related hardware. So these, to get these removed, you're going to need a hex head key or an Allen wrench. I have this hex head socket, I'm sorry. It's a 5mm and it fits perfectly into the top of it. And then you need a 14mm wrench. I'm using a ratcheting wrench because it makes it a lot easier to get it removed. So we'll need, of course, the washer. We don't need the nut. The new shock has a new supplied one with the nylon insert, the nylock, so that way it'll lock on there. But we do need the top hat. Make sure you have all related hardware. These are the rubber bushings and the sleeve. You can remove. Alright, this one, if you look, it's actually missing a bump stop. Whoever installed these failed to put the original bump stop on there. And then we need this washer. This washer is what holds the bump stop in place. I'll show you the exact order that these go on in one moment. Now here's what an original bump stop looks like. On a lowered vehicle, you want it to look like that. Just go ahead and take it, cut the bottom half off. We're going to put that onto the new shock. Next, put on that washer. This washer, it'll stop right here on the end of the piston. Next, we're going to put on the dust cover. Then you have this large black washer. Let's go for the spring. Lowering spring next. Then, slide your top hat on. You have that last washer. And then just get the nut started. We're not going to tighten that until we lower the car back to the ground. Now when inserting this, one reason we don't want to tighten this is because We want it to be able to spin freely still. That way when we're sliding it up into the body of the car, we can line these up correctly. When putting this in, see this little groove right here, how it's dipped down? This is always the rear facing the inside of the car. That's where the 14mm bolt goes through the fork and it tightens up right there. So keep that in mind when we're lining it up, back into position. Once you get it in, go ahead and reach around and put one of the 14mm nuts on top to hold it into position. That way it won't fall back out. Just like that. Next we need to get the shock reattached to the fork, so go ahead and wiggle it around, slide it on, make sure, yep, mine's right in the rear. Okay, now don't push it all the way up. If you have it lined up straight, slide the fork down and insert the 17mm bolt through the fork and the control arm. What I like to do next makes it so much easier instead of trying to lift it with any of your muscles. Use a floor jack, lift it up under the lower control arm, and you'll see it push it right into position. While it's there, feed your 14mm the bolt for the top of the fork, and then go ahead and retighten that one. And for the 17mm on the bottom, since you already have the bolt in, go ahead and put the nut in on the opposite side, but do not tighten it all the way. Leave about 1mm of space between the nut and the fork. We want it to be loose so when we lower the car, it doesn't put any premature stress on that rubber bushing. And then when the car is completely finished with the new shocks and springs, we will tighten these while the car is on the ground so that way it's in resting position. And that'll be it for the front suspension. If you're wondering, I actually changed I put the stainless brake lines on. These are Teflon coated stainless steel brake lines. And then I put on the cross-drilled slotted rotors with the new pads already. Now the rear suspension is a little bit different on the Preludes as compared to the Civics. The first thing we're going to do is remove the 17mm bolt at the bottom of the shock. Now we need to get to the top of the shock. So if you still have your liner in here and it's held on with all the plastic clips, go ahead and try to remove those as carefully as possible so you can avoid damaging them. And then we need to get the liner pulled away. This one was kind of just in there already. Here's the top of this top hat. There are two 14mm nuts on both sides of it. And you also have a 17mm nut right here. And this one's a little hard to see, it's a little dark in here. But there's a little cover here, just remove that. And now you can see it. We need to remove the 17mm nut here also. You can remove those in any order, it does not matter. Just get all 4 of those nuts removed. After all 4 of the nuts are removed, I like to use a little hammer and just kind of hit. That is for the upper control arm. Do it on this side and then go to the reverse side. Hit this one down as well. Okay, and as we remove those nuts, the upper control arm came down. That we can now move out of the way. And you need to press down on the whole assembly. And what that's going to do, it's going to drop it out the top. Might be even easier to step on it, it's a little more added muscle. There we go. Then you can lift, bend back down, and then out she comes. One step that I skipped, which may help you possibly get it out if you're having trouble getting the shock out of there, remove the 17mm nut connecting the sway bar end linked to the sway bar. It does have a configuration here so you can put an Allen wrench in there and then use a 17mm wrench to get that nut removed if you're having trouble spinning it off freely. Go ahead and disassemble the shock assembly. This is exactly the same procedure as the front. We need the top hat, the dust cover, any related hardware for the new shock. Now unfortunately for me, this last one gave me trouble. The inside of it where you put the hex head key, it was stripped. So I just used my grinder and I grinded the head off because we don't need the hardware. It has its new one and we're not reusing the shock. So if that's your case, if you need to, you can cut off that nut on the top of it. Now, make sure you put this as the inboard side because the way the bolt goes in, it is going to slide in. That's where it tightens. So we're going to try to put it in the exact same way we removed it, which was like this. Slide it in over here. You're going to push down and then get the fork. Perfect. Go ahead and reinsert the 17mm bolt on the bottom. That'll hold the shock into place. And then go ahead and tighten it. And similar to the front, leave about 1mm of space between the edge of the bolt and the edge of the shock. We're going to lower the car to the ground before we tighten all those. Now we need to get the upper control arm back into position. From this extended length, it's hard to line up because of where these are tightened at. I'm going to put a floor jack and I'm going to lift the whole assembly, and it'll make it a lot easier to guide these back into the holes and then tighten the nuts up on top. And with the lifted position, just guide them in. Perfect. Go ahead and put the two 17mm nuts on the upper control arm, and put the two 14mm nuts on the top hat, and go ahead and tighten those completely. Go ahead and put your liner back in. And now the rear is completely finished. Went ahead and finished off the stainless brake lines, also the new pads and rotors. Get your wheels put back on, and let's get the car lowered to the ground. Go ahead and get the car completely off all jack stands, and then once you lower it, see how it pushes it up? Now we can just thread the nut down a little bit till it catches on the nylon, and then I'm using a ratcheting wrench, and also a crescent wrench. Go ahead and tighten up those completely. And then do the same for the rear one. Next, what I like to do, I'll drive around the block just to get the suspension loosened up and settled as much as possible so I can tighten those remaining two bolts. And with the car on the ground, go ahead and tighten that front bolt that connects to the lower fork, and the rear one, which is a lot easier to get to. The front one you may just have to reach around from the tires on both sides, and the rear one is just very easy to access from the rear of the car. And that'll be it for this episode, guys. Finished up lowering the car with the new shocks and springs. We got the new brake lines on and the new pads and rotors. But thanks again, guys, for watching, and we will see you in the next episode.